When my daughter-in-law stopped calling me Mom, I pretended not to notice. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself she was busy, that life gets complicated, that people change the way they speak without meaning anything by it. But deep down, in that quiet place where we keep the truths we're not ready to face, I knew something had shifted. Something fundamental. Something that couldn't be undone with a simple conversation or a kind gesture. It happened gradually, the way most endings do. Not with a crash or a confrontation, but with silence. With distance measured in small gestures rather than miles. With the absence of warmth where warmth used to live. I remember the exact moment I realized it was gone. We were standing in my kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. The light was coming through the window the way it always did, golden and soft, painting everything in that gentle glow that makes ordinary moments feel sacred. She was helping me prepare dinner, something we'd done together countless times before. Her hands moved efficiently, chopping vegetables with the precision I'd taught her years ago when she first joined our family. "Could you pass the salt?" she asked, not looking up from the cutting board. Not "Mom, could you pass the salt?" Just a simple request, direct and polite, the way you'd speak to anyone. To a colleague. To a neighbor. To someone you respected but didn't love. I handed her the salt shaker, and our fingers didn't touch. She took it with a quiet, "Thank you," and continued working. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was careful, measured. The kind of silence that exists between people who are trying very hard not to say what they're really thinking. I stood there with my hands in the dishwater, watching the soap bubbles catch the light, and I felt something break inside my chest. Not dramatically, not with tears or words. Just a quiet fracture, like ice cracking on a frozen lake when spring finally comes. She used to call me Mom with such ease, with joy even. I remember the first time she said it, just a few weeks after the wedding. We were shopping together, looking at curtains for their new apartment, and she turned to me with fabric samples in her hands and said, "Mom, which one do you think would look better in the bedroom?" The word had come out so naturally, so full of trust and affection, that I'd had to turn away to hide the tears in my eyes. I'd lost my own mother years before. The sound of someone calling me Mom in that context, not as a mother to my son, but as a daughter to me, had filled a space I didn't even know was empty. But now it was gone. Now she called me by my first name when she called me anything at all, and most of the time, she just avoided addressing me directly altogether. I dried my hands on the kitchen towel and looked at her profile. She was beautiful, my daughter-in-law. Delicate features, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, eyes that used to light up when she saw me. Now those eyes were guarded, polite, distant. "Is everything okay?" I asked quietly, even though I knew the answer. "Everything's fine," she said, still not looking at me. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I replied, because what else could I say? How do you tell someone that you can feel them pulling away without sounding desperate? How do you ask why their love has conditions without sounding accusatory? I turned back to the dishes, and we finished preparing dinner in that careful silence. Later, when my son came home and the three of us sat down to eat, I watched them together. The way she smiled at him, the way she touched his arm when she laughed, the warmth she gave him so freely, she withheld from me completely. And I smiled through dinner, asked about their week, complimented her cooking, and pretended that my heart wasn't aching with a loss I couldn't name. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We swallow our pain. We protect the peace. We tell ourselves that our hurt doesn't matter as much as everyone else's comfort. That night, after they left, I sat alone in my living room in the dark. I didn't turn on the television or read a book. I just sat there, replaying every interaction from the past few months, looking for the moment when things changed, looking for what I'd done wrong. Had I been too involved, too distant? Had I said something that hurt her without realizing it? Had I crossed some invisible line that daughters-in-law draw around their marriages, their homes, their lives? I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue when I wanted to offer advice. All the times I'd held back from visiting, even though I desperately wanted to see my son. All the ways I'd tried to be the perfect mother-in-law, respectful and supportive, without being overbearing. And still, somehow, I'd failed. The relationship I'd treasured, the daughter I'd hoped to gain, had slipped through my fingers like water, and I didn't know how to get it back. I didn't even know if I should try. Because here's the truth they don't tell you about family relationships. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes trying your best isn't enough. Sometimes, despite your most sincere intentions and your most careful efforts, you still lose. I sat in that darkness and let myself feel the full weight of it. The loneliness, the rejection, the grief for a relationship that had died so quietly, I'd almost missed its passing. When my daughter-in-law stopped calling me mom, she didn't just change what she called me. She redrew the boundaries of our relationship. She made it clear, without ever saying the words directly, that I was no longer the person she'd once invited into her heart. And the worst part? I still loved her. I still wanted the best for her. I still hoped, against all evidence, that somehow we'd find our way back to each other. But hope, I was learning, can be the most painful thing to carry. I went to bed that night with a heavy heart, and I prayed. Not for things to go back to the way they were, because I was beginning to understand that wasn't possible, but for acceptance, for peace. For the strength to love her from a distance, if that's what she needed from me. I didn't know then that the distance would only grow. I didn't know that this was just the beginning of a loss that would reshape my understanding of family, of love, of what it means to be a mother long after your children are grown. I didn't know that sometimes the people we love most become strangers we recognize but no longer know. But I was about to learn. I need to tell you how it all began so you understand how far we fell. When my son first brought her home to meet me, I was nervous in a way I'd never been before. I'd raised him alone for most of his life. His father had left when he was just 7 years old, walking out of our lives with barely a goodbye and never looking back. It had been just the two of us for so many years, building a life together, creating our own traditions, learning how to be a family even when the shape of it wasn't what we'd planned. I'd worked 2 jobs to keep him in good schools. I'd sat up late helping with homework even when exhaustion made my eyes blur. I'd cheered at every soccer game, attended every parent-teacher conference, celebrated every small victory as if it were a miracle. Because to me, it was. Every day he grew into a good man was a miracle. So when he told me he'd met someone serious, my heart did something complicated. It expanded with joy for him and contracted with fear at the same time. Because I knew what this meant. I knew that I would have to share him now. That I would have to step back and let another woman become the center of his world. The mature part of me welcomed this. I wanted him to have love, to build his own family, to experience the kind of partnership I'd never quite achieved. But there was a smaller, more vulnerable part of me that whispered late at night, what if she takes him away from you completely? What if you lose your son to a woman who doesn't understand the history you share, the sacrifices you made, the bond you've built? I pushed those fears down deep and prepared to meet her with an open heart. Her name was Emily. She was a teacher, soft-spoken and kind, with a gentle laugh that seemed to light up my son's entire face. The first time I opened my door to them, I saw immediately how he looked at her. Like she was the answer to questions he hadn't known he was asking, like she was home. And my heart, despite its fears, melted a little. "Mom," he said, his voice full of pride and nervousness, "this is Emily." She stepped forward with a warm smile and extended her hand. But then, seemingly on impulse, she pulled me into a hug instead. A real hug, not the polite half-embrace people offer when they're being socially appropriate. A hug that said she wanted to know me, to be close to me, to become part of our little family. "I've heard so much about you," she said, pulling back to look at me with genuine warmth in her eyes. "He talks about you all the time." "Good things, I hope," I said, the standard response falling from my lips before I could think of anything more original. "The best things," she assured me. "He says you're the strongest person he knows." Something in my chest loosened at those words. This wasn't a woman who saw me as competition. This wasn't someone who wanted to replace me or push me out of my son's life. This was someone who valued the same man I'd raised, who appreciated the work I'd done to help him become who he was. We had dinner that night, the three of us around my old dining table. I'd cooked his favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables, the way I'd been making it since he was a child. Emily asked for the recipe. She asked about his childhood, laughing at the stories I told about his stubborn streak, his creative excuses for avoiding bedtime, his fierce loyalty to his friends. She listened like she really wanted to know, like understanding his history mattered to her. He never told me about the time he tried to build a rocket in the backyard, she said, looking at him with affectionate amusement. My son groaned, covering his face with his hands. Mom, did you have to tell that story? Of course I did, I said, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. It's one of my favorites. You were so determined. You'd read a book about space exploration and decided that very day that you were going to be an astronaut. I was 9, he protested, but he was smiling. You were brilliant, I corrected. You still are. Emily reached over and took his hand, and the gesture was so natural, so full of love, that I had to look away before the emotion showed too clearly on my face. They got engaged 3 months later. The wedding was small but beautiful, held in a garden on a spring afternoon when the flowers were just beginning to bloom. I watched my son stand at the altar, handsome in his suit, and I thought about all the moments that had led to this one. All the scraped knees I'd bandaged, all the tears I'd dried, all the dreams I'd helped him chase. And then Emily walked down the aisle, and I saw the future replacing the past. I saw him becoming someone's husband, someone's partner, someone's whole world in a way he'd never quite been mine, even when it was just the two of us. I cried during the ceremony. Happy tears, mostly, but also tears for what I was losing, even as I gained a daughter. After the wedding, Emily and I grew close in a way I hadn't expected. She called me regularly, sometimes just to chat about nothing in particular. She asked my opinion about decorating their apartment, about recipes, about handling difficult situations at work. She invited me to lunch, to shopping trips, to movie nights when my son was working late. I never had a mother I could talk to like this, she told me once, over coffee at a cafe near her school. My mom is difficult, critical, nothing I do is ever quite good enough for her. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You're good enough, I said firmly. More than good enough, she smiled, but there was sadness in it. I just want you to know that having you in my life means a lot to me. You're the mother I always wished I had. Those words settled into my heart like a blessing, like a promise, like the beginning of something I'd always wanted but never expected to find. She started calling me Mom a few weeks after that conversation. It happened naturally, without announcement or awkwardness. We were planning a birthday surprise for my son, discussing details over the phone, and she said, Mom, do you think he'd like this better than that? And the word hung in the air between us. Sweet and sacred. I think he'd love either one, I'd said, my voice catching slightly, because it's coming from you. From then on, I was Mom. Not my mother-in-law, not my first name, but Mom. And every time she said it, I felt less alone. Less like I was losing my son, and more like I was gaining a family. I helped them paint their apartment on weekends. I taught Emily how to make my son's favorite dishes. When she got sick with the flu one winter, I brought over homemade soup and sat with her while she rested, even though my son was at work and couldn't be there. You didn't have to do this, she'd said weakly from the couch, wrapped in blankets. Yes, I did, I'd replied simply. You're family. And I meant it. Somewhere along the way, without even realizing it was happening, I'd stopped thinking of her as my son's wife and started thinking of her as my daughter. Someone I loved independently of him. Someone whose happiness mattered to me for her own sake. We had traditions. Friday lunches when both of our schedules allowed. Monthly shopping trips where we'd browse stores and talk about everything and nothing. Late-night phone calls when she needed advice or just wanted to vent about a difficult day. I thought we had built something real, something lasting, something that would survive the normal ups and downs of family life. I thought I'd finally found the daughter I'd never had. Looking back now, I can see I was building my happiness on a foundation I didn't fully control. I was investing my heart in a relationship that, however genuine it felt, was ultimately dependent on circumstances beyond my influence. But I didn't see that then. I only saw the joy, the connection, the beautiful feeling of being needed and wanted and loved. I didn't see the cracks forming. I didn't notice the small changes in her tone, the slight increase in distance, the gradual cooling of her warmth. I was so grateful for what I had that I didn't protect myself against losing it. And that, perhaps, was my first mistake. The changes started so small that I convinced myself I was imagining them. It was in the pauses before she responded to my texts. Where she used to reply within minutes, now hours would pass, sometimes a full day. And when she did respond, the messages were shorter, more functional. Sounds good instead of that sounds wonderful, Mom, I can't wait. Or let me check my schedule instead of I'd love to, what time works for you? I told myself she was busy. Teaching is demanding. She had papers to grade, lessons to plan, parent conferences to manage. She was building a life with my son, and that took time and energy. It was natural for things to shift a little. But then the Friday lunches started getting canceled. The first time she had a legitimate reason, a staff meeting that had been scheduled last minute. I'm so sorry, Mom, she'd texted. Can we reschedule for next week? Of course, I'd replied. Work comes first, we'll do it another time. Next week came and she canceled again, a parent conference that ran long. The week after that, she wasn't feeling well. The week after that, she didn't mention lunch at all, and when I brought it up, she said she had plans with her colleagues. We're doing a team-building thing, she explained, her voice sounding distant over the phone. I probably should have mentioned it earlier. That's all right, I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. Maybe the week after. Maybe, she said. I'll let you know. But she didn't let me know, and I didn't want to push. I didn't want to be that mother-in-law, the one who demanded attention and made her son's wife feel obligated and trapped. So I waited for her to reach out. She didn't. Our monthly shopping trips disappeared without discussion. 1 month turned into 2, then 3. When I suggested we go, she said she'd been doing most of her shopping online lately. More convenient, she said, less time-consuming. The phone calls became rare. I started initiating most of them, and even then, she often let it go to voicemail. When she did answer, the conversations were brief, surface level. She'd tell me she was fine, work was fine, everything was fine, and then she'd find a reason to go. I'm actually in the middle of cooking dinner, she'd say. Or I have some things I need to finish before tomorrow. Or simply, I should probably go. I started to feel like an interruption in her life rather than a part of it. My son didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did notice, but didn't know what to say. Men sometimes miss the subtle shifts in relationships, the unspoken tensions that women pick up on instinctively. When I asked him how Emily was doing, he'd say she was great. Busy, but great, happy, and I'd wonder if I was losing my mind, if I was creating problems where none existed. If my fear of being abandoned was making me see rejection in normal life changes. But then came the Sunday dinners. We'd established a routine early in their marriage. Every other Sunday, they'd come to my house for dinner. I'd cook, we'd eat together, we'd sit around the table for hours talking and laughing. It was sacred time, family time, the thing I looked forward to all week. Emily started finding reasons to miss them. I'm not feeling great, she'd tell my son, who would relay the message to me. I think I'm coming down with something. Or, I have so much work to do. I really need to use the weekend to catch up. Or, I promised my friend I'd help her with something. At first, my son came alone. He'd apologize for her absence, assure me she sent her love, and we'd have dinner just the two of us like in the old days. Part of me enjoyed having him to myself again. But a larger part of me felt the absence of her presence like a missing limb. Then he started canceling too. Emily's not feeling up to it, and I should probably stay home with her, he'd say. And what could I say to that? A husband should be with his wife, That's the natural order of things. Of course, I'd tell him, take care of her. We can do it another time. But another time kept getting postponed. Weeks went by, a month, then 2 months. I ate alone on those Sunday evenings, surrounded by food I'd prepared for 3 people. I'd sit at my table with empty chairs across from me and try not to feel sorry for myself. Try not to feel forgotten. When they finally did come over, something had changed in the air between us. Emily was polite, courteous. She complimented my cooking and asked polite questions about my week. But there was a wall there now, invisible but solid. She sat slightly turned away from me at the table. She directed most of her comments to my son. When she laughed, it was at things he said, not things I said. I noticed she'd stopped calling me Mom. It happened gradually enough that I couldn't pinpoint an exact moment. But one day, I realized she'd been using my first name for weeks. Or avoiding calling me anything at all, restructuring her sentences to skip over any form of address. Could you pass the salt? Instead of Mom, could you pass the salt? That's a nice dress instead of that's a nice dress, Mom. Small differences, tiny changes. But they added up to a distance that grew wider every time we were together. I wanted to ask her about it. I wanted to sit her down and say, what happened? What did I do? How do I fix this? But I was afraid. Afraid of her answer. Afraid of pushing her even further away. Afraid of confirming that I'd done something unforgivable without even knowing it. So I stayed silent. I smiled through dinners that felt more like obligations than celebrations. I accepted the growing distance as if it were weather, something happening to me that I had no power to change. My son seemed oblivious to it all, or maybe he wasn't oblivious. Maybe he just didn't know how to navigate the tension between his wife and his mother. Maybe he hoped that if he ignored it, it would resolve itself. But it didn't resolve. It only got worse. The holidays that year were when I really felt how much had changed. I'd always hosted Thanksgiving. It was my favorite holiday, a time when I could pour all my love into preparing a meal, into creating warmth and abundance, into gathering the people I cared about around one table. Even in the lean years, when money was tight and I was raising my son alone, I'd managed to make Thanksgiving special. A turkey might have been small and sides might have been simple, but the feeling was always there. Home, family, gratitude. I assumed this Thanksgiving would be the same. I mentioned it to my son in early November, asking what time they wanted to come over, what dishes Emily might want me to make. There was a pause on the other end of the phone, too long of a pause. Actually, Mom, he said carefully, Emily's family invited us to their place this year. Her parents are getting older, and she really wants to spend the holiday with them. Something cold settled in my chest, but I kept my voice warm. Oh, of course, that makes sense. Family is important. Maybe we could do something the day after, he offered. Like a second Thanksgiving, just the 3 of us. Sure, I said. That would be nice. But when the day after Thanksgiving came, they canceled. Emily wasn't feeling well. Too much rich food at her parents' house, my son explained. She needed to rest. I spent that weekend alone, eating leftover turkey I'd cooked for myself, watching Christmas movies on television, and trying not to count how many holidays I had left before I became completely optional in their lives. Christmas was worse. They came over on Christmas Eve for a few hours. Emily sat on my couch looking uncomfortable, checking her phone repeatedly, speaking only when spoken to. She'd brought a gift for me, something generic and impersonal. A scented candle set, the kind of thing you buy for someone you don't know very well. I'd spent weeks choosing gifts for her. A beautiful scarf I'd seen her admire in a shop window months ago. A book by her favorite author. A framed photo of her and my son from their wedding day that I'd had professionally restored and matted. She opened them with a polite smile. Thank you, she said. These are nice. Nice. Not I love them. Not you remembered. Just nice. We ate cookies I'd baked. We exchanged pleasantries. And then, after barely 2 hours, Emily stood up and said they should probably get going. They had to stop by her parents' house still, she explained. They were expected for dinner. My son looked torn. I could see it in his face, the pull between his wife and his mother. But he stood up too, because of course he did. He was her husband. That was where his loyalty belonged now. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, hugging me at the door. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I replied, holding on maybe a second too long. Emily gave me a brief hug, barely making contact. "Merry Christmas," she said, already turning toward the car. I watched them drive away from my front window, watched the taillights disappear around the corner. And then I sat down in my quiet house, surrounded by decorations I'd put up with such hope, and let myself cry. Not loud, dramatic tears. Just quiet ones that slipped down my cheeks while I sat in the glow of the Christmas tree lights. I thought about all the Christmases before this one. All the years it had been just me and my son, making our own traditions, finding joy in small things. I thought about the Christmas mornings when he was little, when his excitement over simple gifts made me feel like I'd given him the world. And I thought about the future stretching ahead of me. More holidays spent alone. More occasions where I'd be the afterthought, the obligation, the duty visit that got squeezed in between the real celebrations. I'd known intellectually that this was how things worked. Children grow up, they build their own lives, they create new families. And parents, if they're lucky, get invited to the edges of those new families, get to visit occasionally, get to be loved from a distance. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your bones are two very different things. In the new year, things got even stranger. Emily started declining invitations I hadn't even extended yet. I'd call to invite them over for my son's birthday dinner, and she'd already have plans. Plans I wasn't included in. A surprise party with their friends, she explained. Just a small thing, nothing big. When my son's birthday actually came, he stopped by my house for an hour in the afternoon. Alone. "Where's Emily?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would hurt. "She's setting things up for tonight," he said. "The party." "Right," I said, "the party." I gave him his gifts. We ate cake. He showed me photos on his phone of a vacation they were planning. And then he left to go celebrate with the people who apparently mattered more than I did. I started to notice other things. Small things that added up to a clear message. When I commented on Emily's Facebook posts, she wouldn't respond. But she'd respond to other people's comments on the same posts. When I sent cards for Valentine's Day, for Easter, for no reason at all, I never heard if they received them. When I ran into them accidentally at the grocery store one Saturday, Emily seemed flustered, almost embarrassed to be seen with me. She made an excuse about needing to rush home, and they cut the conversation short. I began to feel like someone Emily was trying to avoid. Like my presence in her life was something she tolerated rather than welcomed. Like I'd become a burden she hadn't asked for and didn't want, but I still didn't understand why. I went over our interactions obsessively, looking for the moment I'd offended her. Had I been too intrusive, too distant? Had I given unwanted advice? Had I criticized something without realizing it? Had I said something that hurt her feelings? I came up empty every time. I couldn't identify a specific incident, a clear turning point. The distance had grown slowly, like ice forming on a pond. You don't notice it happening until one day you look out and realize the entire surface is frozen solid. I wanted to talk to my son about it. But how do you tell your child that his wife doesn't seem to love you anymore without sounding like you're trying to come between them? How do you express your pain without making him feel guilty for being happy? So I said nothing. I accepted fewer and fewer invitations. I stopped calling as often. I pulled back because it hurt less than reaching out and being disappointed again and again. And I told myself this was normal. This was what happened in families. This was the natural progression of life. I was being overly sensitive, overly needy. I needed to give them space and trust that eventually things would get better. But in my heart, I knew better. In my heart, I knew I was losing her. And with her, I was losing a part of the future I'd imagined for myself. A future where I wasn't alone, where I had a daughter to share life with. Where I was still needed and wanted and loved. That future was slipping away, and I didn't know how to hold on to it without destroying what little remained. The moment everything truly broke happened on an ordinary Tuesday in March. I hadn't seen them in person for almost 2 months. We talked on the phone a few times, brief conversations full of polite updates and vague promises to get together soon. But soon kept getting pushed further and further into the future. Then my son called one evening, his voice excited in a way I hadn't heard in a while. "Mom, we have news," he said. "Big news." My heart leapt. I immediately thought, a baby, they're pregnant. "I'm going to be a grandmother." "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to let all my hope show. "We bought a house," he said. "Not a baby, a house." Still wonderful news, of course. Still something to celebrate, but different from what I'd imagined. "That's amazing," I said, and I meant it. "Tell me everything." He described it with enthusiasm. 3 bedrooms, a backyard, a neighborhood with good schools for the future. They'd been looking for months, he said. It all happened so quickly once they found the right place. "I didn't know you were house hunting," I said, trying not to let the hurt show. There was a time when Emily would have told me. When we would have looked at listings together. When she would have asked my opinion about neighborhoods and layouts, and all the details that go into such a big decision. "We wanted to wait until it was official before we told anyone," he explained. "We didn't want to jinx it." "When do you move in?" 2 weeks, he said. "That's actually why I'm calling. We're going to have a little housewarming party once we're settled. Nothing big, just close family and friends. You'll come, right?" "Of course," I said. "I wouldn't miss it." "Great." Emily's really excited about it. She's already planning everything. I wondered if that was true, if Emily was excited about me coming, but I didn't ask. The housewarming party was on a Saturday afternoon in late March. I bought them a nice gift, a set of kitchen items I knew they'd need. I dressed carefully, wanting to look put together, but not like I was trying too hard. And I drove to their new house with my stomach twisted in knots, not quite sure why I was so nervous. The house was beautiful, bigger than I'd expected, with a well-maintained lawn and flowers already blooming in the garden beds. Cars lined the street. Through the windows, I could see people moving around inside, laughing, talking, celebrating. I parked and walked up to the front door with my gift in hand. Before I could knock, the door swung open. A woman I didn't recognize stood there, holding a glass of wine. "Hi," she said cheerfully. "You must be here for the party, come on in." I stepped inside and immediately felt out of place. The house was full of people I'd never seen before. Young couples, mostly. They're friends from work, from college, from the various circles of their life that I wasn't part of. I saw my son across the room, talking animatedly to a group of men. Emily was in the kitchen, surrounded by women, laughing at something someone had said. Neither of them had noticed I'd arrived. I stood in the entryway for a long moment, holding my gift, feeling invisible. Finally, I made my way through the crowd to the kitchen. "Emily," I said, touching her arm gently. She turned, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance. But then she smiled, the polite smile I'd gotten used to. "Oh, hi," she said. "You made it. I brought you something," I said, holding out the gift. "For the house." "That's sweet, thank you." She took it and immediately set it down on the counter without looking at it. "The drinks are in the cooler on the back patio. Food's on the dining table. Help yourself to anything." And then she turned back to her conversation as if I'd already left. I stood there for a moment, uncertain. Should I try to join the conversation? Should I wait for her to introduce me to her friends? Should I just quietly slip away to another part of the house? Before I could decide, one of the women in the group looked at me with polite curiosity. "Are you a neighbor?" she asked. Emily didn't correct her, didn't introduce me. Just let the question hang in the air. "I'm his mother," I said quietly, gesturing toward where my son stood in the living room. "Oh," the woman said, "nice to meet you." And that was it. Emily still didn't say anything, didn't acknowledge our relationship, didn't pull me into the circle or make me feel welcome. I excused myself and went to find my son. "Mom," he said when he saw me, his face lighting up. He gave me a hug. "When did you get here?" Just now, I said. The house is beautiful. Thanks, Emily did most of the decorating. She has such a good eye for this stuff. He introduced me to the men he'd been talking to. They were friendly enough, asking polite questions about how long I'd lived in the area, what I did for a living. But it was clear they were just being courteous. I wasn't really part of this group, this life my son had built. After a while, I excused myself and wandered through the house. I looked at the photos Emily had hung on the walls. Pictures of their wedding, pictures of vacations I hadn't known they'd taken, pictures of them with friends, at parties, at events. A whole life documented in photographs. I wasn't in any of them. Not a single photo of me with my son. Not one picture of the family we'd been before Emily came along. It was as if his life had started the day he met her, and everything before that was irrelevant. I found myself in what was clearly going to be a guest room. Boxes were stacked in the corner, still unpacked. I sat on the edge of the bare mattress and let the reality sink in. This was their home. Their life, their future, and I wasn't part of it in any meaningful way. I was a guest at best, an obligation. Someone they invited to things because it was expected, not because they genuinely wanted me there. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly stood up, not wanting to be found sitting alone in their empty guest room like some pathetic figure. But the footsteps past continued too, 28 a.m. by, and I sank back down. How had it come to this? How had I gone from being someone Emily called mom, someone she confided in and spent time with, to being someone she couldn't even properly introduce to her friends? I stayed in that room longer than I should have. Part of me wanted to leave, to just slip out the door and drive home and pretend I'd never come. But another part of me, the stubborn part that had survived my husband's abandonment and single parenthood, and all the other hard things life had thrown at me, refused to give up so easily. This was my son's house, my son's life. I had a right to be here. I took a deep breath, smoothed my clothes, and walked back out to the party. I stayed at the party for another hour, moving through the rooms like a ghost. I tried to make conversation with a few people, but it always felt forced. They were polite, but I could tell I was an outsider, someone who didn't quite fit into the world my son and his wife had created. Emily continued to avoid me. Every time I got near her, she'd find a reason to move to another part of the house. At one point, I overheard her talking to one of her friends in the kitchen. "This is exactly what I wanted," she was saying. "A fresh start, our own space, no interference." The word interference hit me like a slap. Was that what I was to her, interference? I moved away before I could hear more. I didn't want to know if she said anything else. Didn't want to have it confirmed that my presence in their life was seen as a problem rather than a blessing. When it came time to cut the cake, Emily's mother was the one who stood beside them. Emily's mother, who according to Emily herself was critical and difficult. Who Emily had once told me she couldn't talk to the way she talked to me. But there she was, laughing and posing for photos, the proud mother celebrating her daughter's achievement. And I stood in the corner of the room, holding a plate I hadn't eaten from, watching my son live a life I wasn't central to anymore. He caught my eye at one point and smiled. A genuine smile, full of happiness and pride. And I smiled back because I loved him and I wanted him to be happy, even if his happiness meant my loneliness. As the party wound down, I found my son in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. "I should probably head out," I said. "Let you two enjoy your new home. You don't have to leave yet," he said, but there wasn't much conviction in his voice. "I know, but I'm tired." "It's been a long day." He dried his hands and walked me to the door. "Thanks for coming, Mom, and thanks for the gift. We'll put it to good use." "I'm really happy for you," I said, and I meant it. "The house is beautiful, you've built a good life." Something flickered in his eyes then, something like guilt or sadness or recognition. "Mom," he started, then stopped. Are you okay?" I could have told him the truth right then. I could have said, "No, I'm not okay. I'm losing my relationship with your wife and I don't know why. I feel like an outsider in your life. I feel like I'm being pushed away and I don't understand what I did wrong." But I didn't say any of that, because what good would it do? It would only make him feel trapped between us. It would force him to choose, and I already knew who he'd choose, who he should choose. "I'm fine," I said instead. "Just tired." He hugged me then, a real hug that lasted several seconds. And I held on tight, memorizing the feeling of it, knowing that moments like this would become rarer and rarer as time went on. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I love you too, sweetheart." More than you know. I drove home in the growing darkness, my hands steady on the wheel even though everything inside me felt shaky. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in my car in the driveway, looking at my small house, the house where I'd raised my son alone, the house that suddenly felt enormous and empty. And that's when I let myself cry. Really cry. Not the quiet tears I'd allowed myself on Christmas, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal. Grief for a relationship I'd thought was real. Grief for the daughter I'd thought I had. Grief for the future I'd imagined, where I'd always be included, always be wanted, always be loved. I cried until I had no tears left. And then I sat in the silence, in the darkness, and I made myself face the truth I'd been avoiding for months. Emily didn't want me in her life anymore. Maybe she never really had. Maybe I'd been a convenience in the beginning, a way to get close to my son, to be accepted into his family. Or maybe her feelings had been genuine once, but had changed over time. It didn't really matter which. The result was the same. I'd built my happiness on a foundation of someone else's affection. And when that affection was withdrawn, everything I'd built came crashing down. The healthy thing to do, I knew, would be to accept this, to gracefully step back. To love them from a distance, and build a life that didn't depend on their inclusion. To find meaning and purpose in things beyond being needed by them. But knowing what you should do and being able to do it are two very different things. I went inside eventually, made myself tea, sat at my kitchen table and stared at nothing. The house was so quiet. Had it always been this quiet, or was I just noticing it more now? My phone buzzed with a text message. I picked it up, hoping irrationally that it might be Emily. That maybe she'd noticed I'd left without saying goodbye to her. That maybe she'd felt my absence and wanted to reach out. But it wasn't Emily. It was my son. "Thanks again for coming today. We really appreciated it. We, not I appreciated it. Not Emily appreciated it. Just we, that vague collective pronoun that included her by default. I typed out a response. Anytime. Beautiful home, so proud of you both." 3 dots appeared, showing he was typing, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a message came through. "Love you, Mom. Love you too," I replied. And then silence. No follow-up, no conversation, just the minimal exchange of affection that seemed to be all we had anymore. I set my phone down and looked around my kitchen. At the magnets on my refrigerator, including one Emily had given me years ago. A silly joke about mothers-in-law that we'd both found funny at the time. At the photos on my wall, including several of her and my son. At the cookbook she'd bought me for Christmas 2 years ago, the one I still used regularly. Evidence of a relationship that had felt real, that I'd thought was built on genuine affection and mutual love. But maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe I'd seen what I wanted to see. Maybe I'd been so hungry for family, so desperate not to be alone, that I'd convinced myself we were closer than we actually were. Or maybe we had been that close once, and I'd ruined it somehow without realizing. Maybe I'd crossed a boundary I didn't know existed. Maybe I'd asked for too much, expected too much, needed too much. The questions circled in my mind like vultures, picking at my confidence, my understanding of reality, my sense of self-worth. I went to bed that night but didn't sleep. I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, and I felt something inside me shift. Something hard and protective forming around the soft, vulnerable parts of my heart. I couldn't keep doing this. Couldn't keep offering love and having it be politely deflected. Couldn't keep reaching out and being kept at arm's length. Couldn't keep hoping things would change when every piece of evidence suggested they wouldn't. I needed to protect myself, to pull back. To stop investing so much of my emotional energy in a relationship that wasn't reciprocated. It would hurt. It already hurt. But at least if I was the one choosing the distance, I'd have some control over the pain. At least I could tell myself I'd made a decision instead of having life continually make decisions for me. And so, somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, I made myself a promise. I would stop trying so hard, stop calling unless they called first, stop inviting them over unless they showed genuine interest in coming, stop hoping for things to go back to the way they were. I would love them still, always, but I would love them from a distance, from a place of self-preservation. Because I was realizing, far too late, that sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest, not because they're cruel, not because they set out to cause pain, but simply because they stopped choosing us, and there's nothing we can do to make them choose us again. The weeks after the housewarming party were strange and hollow. I kept my promise to myself. I stopped initiating contact. I didn't call my son just to chat. I didn't text Emily to see how she was doing. I didn't suggest getting together for lunch or dinner or coffee. I simply waited to see if they would reach out to me. They didn't. A week went by. Then 2, then 3. My phone stayed quiet except for spam calls and messages from the few friends I had. Nothing from my son. Nothing from Emily. It was as if they hadn't even noticed my withdrawal. And that hurt more than I'd expected. Because it confirmed what I'd been afraid was true. My presence in their lives was so minimal that my absence didn't register. I wasn't being missed. I wasn't being thought about. I was just gone, and their lives continued on perfectly well without me. I threw myself into other things to avoid thinking about it. I volunteered at the local library, shelving books and helping with children's reading programs. I took up gardening more seriously, spending long hours in my backyard coaxing flowers to bloom and vegetables to grow. I reconnected with an old colleague from work and started meeting her for coffee every Thursday morning. I built a life that didn't revolve around my son and his wife. And on the surface, it looked like I was doing fine, like I'd moved on, like I'd found peace with the situation. But late at night, when I was alone with my thoughts, the loneliness was crushing. I'd lie awake and imagine what they were doing. Were they having dinner together, laughing about their day? Were they making plans for the weekend, decorating their house, living their life? Were they ever talking about me at all? Did my son ever say, "I should call my mom"? Did Emily ever think about the relationship we used to have? Or had I been so easily forgotten that I didn't even cross their minds? Mother's Day came in May. I woke up that morning with a familiar ache in my chest. For years, my son had made Mother's Day special. Even when he was young and had no money, he'd make me breakfast in bed, usually burning the toast and over-scrambling the eggs, but the effort had meant everything. As he got older, the gestures got more sophisticated, but they were always there. Always something to show he remembered, he cared, he appreciated me. I didn't know what to expect this year. Around 10 in the morning, my phone rang. My son's name appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped despite my best efforts to stay detached. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," he said. He sounded cheerful but rushed. "How's your day going?" "It's fine, quiet, how are you?" "Good, good, busy." "We're actually heading to Emily's parents' place in a bit. Her mom's been planning this big brunch thing." Of course they were. Of course Mother's Day would be spent with Emily's difficult, critical mother. The one Emily had once complained about. The one who was never satisfied with anything Emily did. But apparently, she was still more important than I was. "That sounds nice," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Yeah, should be good. I just wanted to call and wish you a happy Mother's Day. Let you know I'm thinking about you." "I appreciate that." There was a pause. "Are you doing anything today, going out with friends or anything?" "I might do some gardening," I said. "The weather's nice." Another pause. I could hear Emily's voice in the background, saying something I couldn't make out. My son covered the phone, and I heard muffled conversation. "Listen, Mom, I should probably go. We need to get on the road, but I'll call you this week, okay?" "Sure," I said. "Have a good time." "Thanks, love you too." The line went dead. The entire conversation had lasted maybe 3 minutes. I set my phone down and looked around my empty kitchen. Bright sunshine streamed through the windows. Birds were singing outside. It was a beautiful day, and I was spending it alone. No card had arrived in the mail. No flowers. No gesture of any kind beyond a rushed phone call squeezed in before they left for the day. I told myself it was fine. That I was an adult. That Mother's Day was really for mothers of young children anyway. That I shouldn't need external validation or celebration to know my worth. But it hurt anyway. I went outside to my garden like I'd said I would. I pulled weeds and watered plants and tried to find peace in the simple, repetitive motions. The earth was warm under my hands. The smell of growing things filled the air. And slowly, very slowly, I felt some of the tightness in my chest ease. This was enough, I told myself. This small garden, this quiet house, this life I'd built on my own terms. It had to be enough, because it was all I had. That evening, as the sun was setting and I was washing dirt from under my fingernails, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily. "Happy Mother's Day," it read, nothing more. No personal message. No warmth, just the bare minimum acknowledgement of the day. I stared at that message for a long time, trying to decide what it meant. Was it an olive branch? A guilty afterthought. A purely obligatory gesture, because my son had reminded her to send something. I typed out several responses and deleted them all. What could I say that wouldn't sound either desperate or angry? What words could bridge the gap that had grown between us? Finally, I settled on something simple. Thank you. Hope you had a nice day with your family. Your family, not our family. Because that's what they were now, her family, and I was outside of it. She never responded to my message. As spring turned to summer, the silence between us continued. I saw them once, briefly, at a family function for Emily's side. My son had invited me, probably feeling guilty about how little we'd seen each other. The gathering was at Emily's aunt's house, full of her relatives, people I didn't know and who didn't know me. I felt completely out of place. Emily was warm and laughing with her cousins, affectionate with her parents, clearly in her element. My son was absorbed into her family, calling her father Dad, and joking with her brothers like they'd known each other forever. And I sat on the periphery, making polite small talk with whoever happened to be near me, counting the minutes until I could leave without seeming rude. At one point, I watched Emily hug her mother. A real hug, long and genuine, and I remembered how she used to hug me like that. How she used to seek me out at gatherings, stick close to me, make sure I felt included. Now she barely looked in my direction. I left early, claiming a headache. My son walked me to my car. "You okay, Mom?" he asked. "You seem quiet." "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." He looked at me with concern. "We don't see you enough, we should get together more often." "You're busy," I said, "building your life." "It's okay." "It's not okay," he said, and there was genuine distress in his voice. "You're my mother, you matter." I wanted to ask him, if I matter, why haven't you called? If I matter, why am I always the one reaching out? If I matter, why does it feel like I'm an afterthought in your life? But I didn't ask any of that. Instead, I touched his cheek gently, the way I used to when he was a child. "I know you love me," I said, "and I love you, that's what matters." He hugged me tight. "I'll call you this week. I promise, maybe we can have dinner, just us." "I'd like that," I said, but even as I said it, I didn't really believe it would happen, and I was right. The week came and went with no call, no dinner. No follow-through on the promise made with such sincerity. Because that's the thing about people who are busy with their own lives. They mean well. They genuinely believe they'll make time. But when it comes down to it, other things always seem more urgent, more important, more necessary. And the people who love them quietly, without demanding attention, are the ones who get forgotten by the time summer fully arrived. I'd settled into a new rhythm. A life that didn't include my son and daughter-in-law in any regular way. I still loved them, still thought about them every day, still hoped they were happy and healthy and thriving. But I'd stopped expecting anything from them, stopped waiting for phone calls that wouldn't come, stopped imagining scenarios where we'd reconnect and everything would go back to how it used to be. I'd accepted the reality. I was no longer an active part of their daily lives. I was the mother my son loved but rarely thought about. The mother-in-law Emily had once cared for, but had grown distant from for reasons I'd never fully understand, and I had to find a way to be okay with that. My garden flourished that summer. I spent hours out there every day nurturing things that actually responded to my care and attention. Tomatoes ripened on the vine. Flowers bloomed in riot of colors. Herbs grew fragrant and full. It was tangible evidence that my efforts mattered, that I could create something beautiful, that I had purpose beyond being someone's mother. I started taking long walks in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I'd walk through my neighborhood, past houses lit from within, and I'd see families eating dinner together, children playing in yards, couples sitting on porches holding hands. And I felt a pang of longing, yes, but also something else, a kind of peace. This was my life, quiet, simple, solitary in many ways, but mine. I began to understand that I'd spent too many years defining myself through my relationships with other people. As a wife, until my husband left. As a mother, while my son was growing up. As a mother-in-law, when Emily came into our lives. I'd poured myself into these roles so completely that I'd lost track of who I was underneath them all. And now, stripped of those active relationships, I had a chance to find out. I started reading again, not self-help books or escapist fiction, but poetry and philosophy. Words that made me think, that challenged my understanding of life and suffering and meaning. I found comfort in the writings of people who'd experienced loss and loneliness, and had emerged with wisdom instead of bitterness. One quote I came across stayed with me: "We must be willing to let go of the life we planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us." I hadn't planned this life. Hadn't planned to be divorced and alone in my 60s. Hadn't planned to lose the closeness I'd had with my son. Hadn't planned to have a daughter-in-law who'd once called me mom, but now barely acknowledged my existence. But this was the life I had. And I could either spend it mourning what I'd lost, or I could find gratitude for what remained. I still had my health, my home, my garden, my books, my few but genuine friendships. My memories of better times. And yes, still my love for my son, even if the expression of that love had to change form. In August, my birthday came and went with a phone call from my son and a card in the mail. The card was signed by both of them, but I recognized only my son's handwriting. Emily hadn't even bothered to add her own signature. It was such a small thing, but it crystallized everything I'd been feeling. She was done with me, not angry, not hostile, just done. I was a duty, an obligation she fulfilled through my son rather than any genuine feeling. And you know what? I was done too, not done loving them, not done wishing them well. But done hurting myself by hoping for something that clearly wasn't going to happen. I called my son a few days after my birthday. "Hey, Mom," he answered, sounding genuinely happy to hear from me. "How are you? Sorry I didn't call sooner." "It's okay, you're busy, I understand. The card got there all right." "Yes, thank you." It was lovely. We talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular, his work, the house, plans they had for a vacation in the fall. And then, gathering my courage, I said what I'd been planning to say. "Sweetheart, I want to talk to you about something." "Sure, what's up?" "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About life, about family, about what I need to be happy." "Okay," he sounded cautious now. "And I've realized that I've been putting too much pressure on you and Emily, expecting too much. Needing too much." "Mom, you haven't. Let me finish, please," I said gently. "I love you both very much, you know that. But I think I've been so focused on being part of your lives that I've forgotten to fully live my own life. And that's not fair to any of us." There was silence on the other end. "So I'm going to step back a bit," I continued. "Not because I'm angry or hurt, but because I think we all need space. You're building your own family, your own traditions, your own life. And I need to build mine too, as a person, not just as your mother." "Mom, if this is about us not seeing you enough." "It's not about that," I interrupted. "Not really. It's about me learning to be okay on my own. Learning to find joy and purpose that doesn't depend on how often we see each other or how close we are." More silence. I could almost hear him struggling to find the right words. "I don't want you to feel like you have to disappear from our lives," he finally said. "I'm not disappearing. I'll always be here if you need me. I'll always love you. But I'm not going to keep reaching out and trying to force something that isn't happening naturally. I'm going to trust that if you want to see me, you'll make the time, and if you don't, that's okay too. It's not that we don't want to see you. I know, I said softly. I know you love me. I know you mean well. But life gets busy and priorities shift, and that's natural and okay. I just need to accept it and move forward instead of holding on to how things used to be. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I'm sorry, Mom. If I've made you feel unwanted or unimportant, that was never my intention. I know, sweetheart, I know. Can I think about this, about what you're saying? Of course. Take all the time you need. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. I'd said what I needed to say. I'd released them from any obligation to manage my feelings or worry about my loneliness. I'd given them permission to live their lives without guilt. And in doing so, I'd given myself permission to do the same. The call from Emily came 2 days later. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello, Emily, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Hi, she said. She sounded uncertain. Do you have a minute to talk? I do. I wanted to call because I think maybe I owe you an explanation. My heart started beating faster. You don't owe me anything. I think I do, she said, because you've been nothing but kind to me and I've been distant, and that's not fair. I waited, not trusting myself to speak. When we first got married, I loved having you in my life, she continued. You were everything my own mother wasn't. Supportive, understanding, easy to talk to, and I got really close to you really fast. I remember, I said quietly. But then, she paused, and I could hear her struggling. Then I started feeling like I was losing myself, like I was becoming too dependent on your approval, your advice, your presence. Like I was recreating the same dynamic I had with my own mother, where I was always trying to please someone. Always worried about disappointing someone. I never meant to make you feel that way, I said. I know you didn't, that's the thing, you didn't do anything wrong. It was my issue, my baggage from my own family. But I didn't know how to explain that without hurting you, so I just pulled back. And the more I pulled back, the harder it became to come back. Until it felt like too much time had passed, too much distance had grown, and I didn't know how to bridge it anymore. I closed my eyes, taking in her words. Part of me wanted to be angry. To say that she should have talked to me, should have been honest, should have given me a chance to understand and adjust. But another part of me, the part that had grown through these months of solitude and reflection, understood. Thank you for telling me, I said. I'm sorry, she said, and her voice cracked. I'm so sorry I hurt you, that I made you feel unwanted, that I took away something that mattered to you without explanation. Emily, I said gently, I appreciate your apology. And I'm glad you're being honest with me now. But I want you to know something. You get to decide what kind of relationship you want with me. You get to set boundaries. You get to protect your emotional health, and I won't resent you for it. She made a small sound, almost like a sob. I meant what I told your husband, I continued. I'm stepping back. Not because I don't care, but because I care enough to want you both to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me in the way I'd hoped it would. But what if, she trailed off. What if what? What if I want to try again, to rebuild what we had but in a healthier way? My heart ached with hope and caution in equal measure. Then I'm open to that, but slowly. At a pace that feels comfortable for both of us. No pressure, no expectations. Okay, she whispered. Okay, we talked for a few more minutes, and when we hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time. I didn't know if things would really change. If Emily truly wanted to reconnect, or if she just felt guilty after talking to my son. I didn't know if this conversation was a turning point, or just a temporary moment of honesty, before we returned to our usual distance. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe a little easier. Not because I had hoped that everything would be fixed, but because I'd released my grip on needing it to be fixed. Because I'd accepted that whatever happened next was okay. Because I'd found a foundation of peace that wasn't dependent on their choices. The months that followed were different. Not magically better, but different. Emily did reach out more often. Not constantly, not the way she had in the early days of their marriage, but occasionally. A text to share a funny story from her classroom. An invitation to coffee every few weeks. Small gestures that showed she was trying, in her own way, to maintain a connection. And I accepted those gestures with gratitude but without expectation. I met her for coffee when she asked, but I didn't suggest it myself. I responded to her texts warmly, but I didn't initiate lengthy conversations. I let her set the pace, and I matched it without resentment. My son noticed the change in me. "You seem different, Mom," he said one afternoon when we were having lunch, just the two of us. "More at peace." "I am," I said. "I've learned some things about myself these past few months." "Like what?" I thought about how to explain it. "Like I spent so many years being what other people needed, that I forgot to figure out what I needed. And when you grew up and built your own life, I felt lost because I didn't have an identity outside of being your mother." He looked uncomfortable. "I never wanted you to feel that way." "I know. And it's not your fault, it's just the natural progression of life. Children are supposed to grow up and move on. Parents are supposed to let them. I just didn't do a very good job of letting go." "You let go," he protested. "You never held me back. Not from your dreams or your choices," I agreed. But emotionally, I was still holding on too tight, still needing to be needed in a way that wasn't healthy for either of us. He was quiet for a moment, processing. "So what changed?" "I realized that love doesn't mean needing someone to complete you. It means wanting good things for them, even when those good things don't include you. It means being happy for their happiness, even if you're lonely. It means releasing your grip and trusting that the connection you have is strong enough to survive distance." "I don't want there to be distance between us," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "There will be some distance," I said gently. "That's natural, you have a wife now. Eventually, maybe children, your life is full, and that's how it should be. I'm not asking for more of your time or attention. I'm just asking that you not feel guilty about living your life." His eyes were shiny with unshed tears. "You're the best mother I could have asked for, you know that, right? And you're the best son," I replied, "which is why I want you to be free. Free to love your wife without worrying about my feelings. Free to build your family without walking on eggshells around me. Free to call me when you want to, not because you feel obligated." "What if I want to call you every day?" I smiled. "Then I'd be delighted, but I won't expect it, and I won't keep score. I'll just be grateful for whatever time we have." He squeezed my hand. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart, always." That conversation marked another turning point. After that, my son seemed more relaxed around me. Less guilty. Less worried about balancing his wife's needs and my feelings. And paradoxically, once I'd released him from that burden, he called more often. Not every day, but regularly. Easy conversations about nothing important. Just staying connected without the weight of obligation. Emily and I found our own rhythm too. We'd never be as close as we were in the beginning. That particular door had closed, and I'd accepted it. But we developed a friendly relationship, something lighter and less intense. Sometimes we'd go weeks without talking, and then she'd invite me to see a movie or help her pick out paint colors for their bedroom. I enjoyed those moments for what they were without mourning what they weren't. In the fall, they told me they were expecting a baby. I was at their house for dinner when they shared the news. Emily was glowing, her hand resting protectively on her still flat belly. My son couldn't stop smiling. "We wanted you to be one of the first to know," he said. I felt joy for them, pure and uncomplicated. And also something else. A kind of bittersweet recognition that this baby would create yet another shift in our relationships. That I would be a grandmother, but I wouldn't get to define what kind of grandmother I'd be. Emily and my son would set those boundaries. "I'm so happy for you both," I said, and I meant it. "You're going to be wonderful parents." Emily looked at me with something like relief. "I was worried about telling you," she admitted. After everything, I still want the best for you," I said. "Both of you, and this baby is going to be so loved." "We want you to be involved," my son said quickly. As involved as you want to be. I'll be here, I promised. However you need me, but on your terms. And I meant that too. I would love this grandchild with everything I had, but I wouldn't push. Wouldn't demand. Wouldn't create expectations that could only lead to disappointment. I would be the grandmother they allowed me to be, nothing more and nothing less. The pregnancy progressed. I saw Emily at doctor's appointments sometimes, when she invited me. I helped set up the nursery, painting walls and assembling furniture alongside my son. I bought small gifts for the baby, thoughtful things I knew they'd need, but I didn't overwhelm them with my excitement. And something interesting happened. The more space I gave them, the more they included me. It was as if my stepping back had allowed them to step forward. My releasing my grip had made them feel safe enough to hold my hand. Emily started calling me mom again. Not all the time, but occasionally. Usually when she was tired or emotional or needing something maternal. And I accepted the title when she used it without holding her to it when she didn't. The baby was born on a cold January morning. A little girl with dark hair and her father's eyes. I met her at the hospital, holding her tiny body in my arms, and I felt something shift in my chest. A new kind of love, pure and protective and asking for nothing in return. She's perfect, I whispered, looking down at my granddaughter's small face. Do you want to hold her more? Emily asked, looking exhausted but radiant in her hospital bed. Only if it helps you rest, I said. Otherwise, she should be with her mama. Emily smiled, something soft and genuine. You continue 6:40 a McCann hold her. I think she likes you. So I sat in the hospital room, rocking my granddaughter gently, and I felt grateful. Not for the relationship I'd hoped to have with Emily, but for the one we actually had. Imperfect, but real. My son came back from getting coffee and stopped in the doorway just watching us. What are you thinking? I asked quietly. That I'm lucky, he said. To have you as my mom. To have Emily as my wife. To have this little girl as my daughter. I'm just really lucky. We all are, I said, and in that moment it was true, despite the loneliness I'd felt. Despite the relationship I'd lost with Emily. Despite all the disappointments and adjustments and painful lessons. We were lucky. Because we had love, even if it didn't look the way I'd expected. Even if it required me to change and grow and let go in ways I hadn't wanted to, even if it meant accepting less than I'd hoped for, we had this moment, this baby. This imperfect, complicated, beautiful thing called family. And it was enough. The years that followed taught me even more about the nature of love and family and letting go. My granddaughter grew. I saw her regularly, but not constantly. I babysat when Emily and my son needed a date night. I attended birthday parties and school plays. I sent cards for holidays and little gifts for no reason at all. But I never assumed I'd be invited to things. Never took it for granted that I'd be included. And because I didn't assume, I was often pleasantly surprised. Emily and I developed an understanding that worked for both of us. We'd never have the mother-daughter relationship I'd once imagined. But we had something else. Something based on mutual respect and clear boundaries and realistic expectations. We could enjoy each other's company without the weight of unmet needs pressing down on us. Sometimes she'd call me when she was struggling with parenting. I don't know what I'm doing, she'd confess. How did you manage when he was this age? And I'd share my experiences without offering unsolicited advice. I'd listen without judgment. I'd support her without trying to take over. You're doing better than you think, I'd tell her. All mothers doubt themselves, it means you care. Did you doubt yourself? Every single day, I admitted. I still do sometimes. She'd laugh, sounding relieved. That actually makes me feel better. My son and I remained close, but in a different way than when he was younger. We were adults together now, not parent and child. We could talk about anything, share our struggles and triumphs, support each other through life's difficulties. He'd come over to help me with projects around the house. Fix things that broke, change the hard-to-reach light bulbs, mow the lawn when my arthritis made it difficult. Not because I asked, but because he wanted to take care of me the way I'd once taken care of him. You don't have to do this, I'd tell him. I know, he'd say, but you're my mom. Let me help. And I'd let him, because I'd learned that accepting help was just as important as offering it, that allowing people to love me in their own ways was its own kind of gift. My granddaughter called me grandma. She'd run to me with open arms when I visited, showing me her drawings and telling me stories about school. And in her uncomplicated affection, I found healing for the wounds I'd carried. She didn't know about the distance that had once existed between her mother and me. Didn't know about the pain I'd felt or the loneliness I'd worked through. To her, I was simply grandma, someone who loved her and listened to her and made her favorite cookies when she visited. And that was enough, more than enough. I learned to measure my worth not by how much I was needed, but by how much I was capable of loving. Not by how often people reached out to me, but by how present I could be when they did. Not by what I'd lost, but by what I'd survived and grown through. The garden I'd started during those lonely months became my sanctuary. Every spring, I planted new flowers. Every summer, I tended them with care. Every fall, I harvested what I'd grown. And every winter, I planned for the next year's growth. It was a metaphor I wasn't subtle about. My life was a garden too. Some things I'd planted hadn't survived. Some relationships I'd hoped would flourish had withered. But new things kept growing. New joys, new purposes, new understandings. I made peace with my ex-husband too, in my own heart. Not by talking to him, he was long gone from my life, remarried and living in another state. But by releasing the bitterness I'd carried about his leaving. By understanding that his inability to stay wasn't a reflection of my worth. That some people aren't capable of the kind of commitment I valued, and that was about them, not me. I made peace with my younger self, the one who'd tried so hard to be everything to everyone, who'd poured herself into motherhood so completely because it was the one role where she felt valued, who'd clung too tightly because she was afraid of being alone. You did your best, I told that younger version of me, and your best was enough, more than enough. I made peace with getting older. With the aches in my joints and the silver in my hair and the way I moved a little slower than I used to. Age wasn't a failure, it was a privilege. Every year I gained was a year I got to watch my son become a good man, my granddaughter grow into herself, the world continue its endless turning, and I made peace with solitude. It wasn't the same as loneliness. Solitude was a choice, a space I created for reflection and rest and self-discovery. Loneliness was a wound, but solitude could be a gift. I learned to enjoy my own company, to cook meals just for myself and savor them, to watch movies I wanted to watch without considering anyone else's preferences, to go to bed when I was tired and wake up when I was rested, to fill my days with things that brought me joy without needing anyone's approval or participation. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a good life, a full life, a life that had taught me resilience and strength and the power of letting go. Sometimes people would ask me if I had regrets. If I wished I'd done things differently with my son, with Emily, with my marriage. And my answer was always the same. I wish I'd learned sooner to love without attaching, to give without expecting, to be present without demanding presence in return. But I didn't regret the journey that taught me those lessons, even the painful parts, especially the painful parts. Because pain, when we move through it instead of away from it, transforms us, makes us deeper, wiser, more compassionate. I became the kind of person who could sit with other people's pain without trying to fix it, who could listen without needing to have answers, who could love people exactly as they were instead of as I wished they'd be. And I found, to my surprise, that people sought me out for that quality. Friends who were struggling would call me. Younger mothers at the library where I volunteered would ask my advice. Even Emily, on her hardest days, would reach out. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she said once after sharing something vulnerable about her marriage. I guess I just trust you. I'm honored, I said simply, and I was. Because trust, I'd learned, was earned through consistency, through showing up when invited and staying away when not, through loving without conditions, through being safe. And that's what I'd become. A safe place for the people I loved, not because I had all the answers or because I never felt hurt or lonely, but because I'd learned to hold my own pain without making it someone else's responsibility. The relationship I'd mourned, the close bond with Emily, had transformed into something different but no less valuable. We'd never be what we were in the beginning. But we'd built something more honest, more sustainable, more respectful of each other's needs and boundaries. And my son, watching the way Emily and I navigated our relationship, learned something important too. He learned that love doesn't mean everyone has to be everything to each other. That families can have different levels of closeness and still be functional and caring. That respecting boundaries is a form of love. I watched him become a better husband because of it. More attentive to Emily's needs, more willing to have difficult conversations, more comfortable with the messiness of human relationships, and I was proud. Not because he was perfect, but because he was trying, because he'd learned from my mistakes and his own, because he was building a marriage based on honesty instead of obligation. On quiet evenings, I'd sit on my back porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that took my breath away. And I'd think about everything I'd been through. Everything I'd learned, everything I'd lost and lost again, and I'd feel grateful, not grateful for the pain exactly, but grateful for what the pain had taught me. Grateful for the strength I'd discovered in myself. Grateful for the capacity I had to keep loving even when love was hard. Grateful for the life I'd built from the ruins of my expectations. This wasn't the story I'd thought I was writing when I first became a mother. It wasn't the happy ending I'd imagined when Emily first called me mom. It wasn't the family portrait I'd dreamed of creating, but it was real, and it was mine, and it was enough. Some nights my granddaughter would call me on video chat. "Grandma, look what I made in school today," she'd say, holding up a drawing or a craft project, and her joy would fill my heart in a way nothing else could. "It's beautiful," I'd tell her. "You're so creative. Can I come see you this weekend?" she'd ask. "If your parents say it's okay, I'd love that." And she'd blow me a kiss through the screen, and I'd blow one back, and I'd think, this is what matters, these small moments, these simple connections. This uncomplicated love. My son would check on me regularly. "You doing okay, Mom?" he'd ask. "I'm doing well," I'd tell him, and I'd mean it, because I was doing well. Not because my circumstances were perfect, not because I had everything I wanted, but because I'd learned to find peace in what I had. To build meaning from the materials of my actual life, instead of the life I'd imagined. Emily and I would have coffee sometimes, just the two of us. We'd talk about parenting and work, and the challenges of balancing everything, and there would be moments of genuine warmth between us. Moments where I remembered why I'd loved her in the first place. She was a good person, a good mother, a good wife to my son, and even though she couldn't be the daughter I'd hoped for, she was still someone I valued, someone whose happiness mattered to me. Someone I was glad to have in my life, even in this limited capacity. "Thank you," she said to me once, out of nowhere. "For what?" "For giving me space, for not making me feel guilty. For still being kind even when I pulled away." "You don't have to thank me for that," I said. "You get to have the relationships you need." "I know, but still." "Thank you," and in that moment I felt something close. Not quite closure because relationships don't really close. They just change shape, but something like acceptance, like peace. I'd spent so much of my life trying to control outcomes, trying to make people love me the way I wanted to be loved, trying to force connections that weren't meant to be forced. And I'd finally learned to let go, to release my grip, to trust that whatever was meant to remain would remain, and whatever was meant to fall away would fall away, and I'd survive either way. Because I was stronger than I'd known, more resilient, more capable of standing on my own, and this is where my story ends tonight. Life doesn't always give us answers right away. Sometimes, God asks us to stay patient, stay kind, and stay silent, not because we are weak, but because He sees what others do not. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. Maybe someone needed this reminder today. Thank you for listening with an open heart. May God see every silent struggle and replace pain with peace. Until next time, this was Voice of Auntie Universe.